Hi everyone, welcome to a Subtle Asian Book Club author interview. My name is Tiffany, one of the co-hosts of Subtle Asian Book Club, and today I am here with Christina Li, who is the middle grade author of Clues to the Universe. Before I let her introduce herself, I will say that we are doing a giveaway for a copy of Clues to the Universe, and it is an international giveaway. So everyone is welcome to enter. All you have to do is first subscribe to Subtle Asian Book Club. Second, comment your favorite subject in school, whether that's English, math, history, science, and just let us know. And then third, comment your Instagram or Twitter handle, or if you want, even an email, just so we have a way of contacting you in case you are randomly selected as the winner. But let's just dive right in. Christina, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'd love to. No, you gave me such a fantastic introduction. I'm Christina Li. I am a college senior, and I am the author of the middle grade novel Clues to the Universe. And I have been such a big fan of such Subtle Asian Book Club for such a long time, so I'm really, really happy to be here.
We are so thrilled to have you. Christina was also on our holiday party for like a Gen Z panel, so be sure to check that out if you want to just listen to her sprout more words of wisdom and also see like chaotic goodness from some author friends. So, do you want to introduce what Clues to the Universe is? We're going to try to refrain from intense spoilers, but if we do have spoilers, I'll make sure to mark them.
Yeah, absolutely. So, just to kind of provide a quick summary, Clues to the Universe is a historical fiction middle grade set in 1983, and it is about a Chinese American aspiring rocket scientist named Ro, who's kind of grieving the unexpected death of her dad, who forms this like unlikely friendship with this introverted and really shy artist named Benji. And together they set out to build Ro's model rocket for the science fair and to also search for Benji's long lost father through a trail of his best-selling space comics. And so, yeah, just a lot of space vibes, 80s, and also, wholesome friendships and found family in this book.
Definitely such a wholesome book. If you are ever feeling down, would highly recommend. I finished it last week and it was just so cute and so pure. Do you want to tell us a little bit about how you first came up with this idea and maybe how it evolved over time?
Yeah, so I this idea had been like kind of percolating in my head for a long time, and I knew kind of certainly like I wanted to write a book about a scientist and an artist. I went to an author event a long time ago, and the author was like, science and art are the same, and that they both draw patterns out of chaos, and I thought that was really like beautiful and poignant. So I was like, ooh, like it'd be so cool if I like wrote a book in which there were like two sides of the same coin, like science and art. And then I knew I wanted to write about a like girl rocket scientist. I couldn't explain why. I just wanted I really, really wanted to like write
No,
about
we need
someone.
that representation.
Exactly, this women of colors in STEM representation. And then so the like actual like a concrete idea for Clues fell into my head, I think the summer after my high school graduation. And I just kept thinking about this girl who was trying to like really like the scientist was trying to logically process her father's death and try to logically process kind of the grief process, and that really wasn't how it worked, right? And so, from that point on, Ro's story kind of came to me, and then I knew I wanted sort of like a character opposite Ro. Like I knew her perspective wouldn't be complete for the novel, and then Benji, came to me, and he was kind of this like kid who was like obsessed with art and comic books and was looking for his dad because his dad was the super famous comic book artist, but also was like this really mysterious figure in his life. So from that point on, I like wrote it, and that was how I got the idea for Clues.
No, I love it. And you talked a little bit about the duality between art and science. And I think, especially like in Asian culture, just like people view it as very opposing things. But you talk about how there's a lot of parallels. They have a lot of like something about chaos. And I thought that was really beautiful. Do you want to dive into about how like it forms each character and how you came up with this?
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, there's definitely kind of a lot of views about sort of like science and the arts. And, when I was growing up, I think science was a little bit more of an acceptable path, or not acceptable, just kind of like was more strongly encouraged by my family than art was. But thankfully, I mean, yeah, there were some voices in my family that were like, oh, like you should go into science, like so you can like earn money. But like also my dad was really, really, really supportive of my career as an author. Like he would always, if I like needed something, like he would always like buy me like a book, or like he would always take me to the library, or like I remember like, I was like trying to go to like conferences as like a teenager, and he would like take me there because like I couldn't go by myself. So I think there is a lot of respect kind of for both the science and the arts kind of in the Asian community. And I think with the characters in the book, right, like Ro and Benji start off as like super, super different people. And I mean, they still are, but through the course of the novel, they really, really come to this kind of like, kind of really solid mutual understanding between each other, and they come to really admire and respect each other. Ro really respects Benji as an artist. She kind of always reflects like, oh, I wish I were talented like him. And then obviously Benji thinks that, you know, Ro is like super, super cool as like a scientist, and like he like really like admires her as well.
Do you think both of their characters would eventually like expand into the other's like forte?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to like spoil anything for, but I think that throughout the course of the book, they do kind of arrive at like, ooh, like Rose starts to get a little bit more intrigued about comic books, you know, and I feel like that's really natural for her because she's such an active. I mean, she doesn't have like super fantastical imagination, but she always is wondering about like space and like trying to figure things out. So naturally, I feel like she would really branch into like space comics or like comic books in general. And then Benji kind of really like at first he like does the science fair because, you know, he has to like otherwise he'd like lose his art class or something. Like he really does it because his like mom made him. But throughout the course of the book, like he really, really gets caught up in this science fair project for like rockets and rocket science. So I totally see a future in which they kind of just like converge and like really like mesh their interests together.
I love how you write about how both of them kind of go together rather than just being opposing figures, even though it does form their characters a bit. Do you have a favorite scene when you wrote Quill Tree Books that like people should look forward to if they haven't read the book yet?
Yes, I absolutely have a favorite scene. I mean, I loved writing the book, and like every scene is very near and dear to my heart. But there's a scene in there about, I think, about a Chinese New Year celebration, in which like Rose family hosts a Chinese New Year celebration, and Benji comes, and there's a lot of, you know, personal like revelations, and they like really get like super close as friends, and there's really great Chinese dessert representation. But I think that was a really, really emotional and pivotal scene for me to write because it was like against the backdrop of like a Chinese New Year celebration, which I, you know, like was really personal to me, and also it was a lot of like revelations and like, you know, what they are as a friendship. So I loved writing that scene. I think that's one of my favorites.
I don't know if you know off the top of your head, but do you have like a favorite quote? I know sometimes people love like blurbing certain quotes or like make graphics of certain quotes. Was there a scene that you like really loved putting into words?
Yeah, so one of the quotes that I really like, and that stayed with me since the first draft, I think there was a quote in talking about grief, where Ro was like, sometimes I wondered if people were meant to walk around with craters in their hearts for the rest of their lives, and talking about kind of the exploration of grief and kind of the permanence, like how it always stays with you, like how your heart is always sometimes, you know, somehow cratered and everything. And in the very first draft, I had this huge scene before I like cut it for like pacing purposes, but basically, you know, Ro talks about how there's on the moon, like there's not a lot of atmosphere, so, you know, footprints on the moon stay there forever, craters on the moon stay there forever, whereas on Earth they like fade and like grow into like lakes and mountains or whatever. But yeah, it was just her comparing kind of the permanence of like the craters on the moon to like the permanence of like grief in people's hearts. So
Oh my gosh, I love that parallel. It's like it fits like the theme of the book very well, I think. And when you lose someone, it definitely still stays with you, even though you find ways to move on. I really like love that you wrote that into it. Especially jumping then into the next question. Sorry, I'm going so fast. You're just like,
no, I love these questions.
knocking them out. Your book explores really serious topics at the same time. We talk about like divorced parents. We talk about like losing a parent to like death. And these are pretty heavy topics, especially for a middle grade book. Because I think when people think middle grade, they're like, oh my gosh, like not sunshines, but like fun adventure. Like obviously there's amazing fun adventure here, but it's a pretty heavy topic to be explored in this book. What really like made you want to write this into like the middle grade novel that it is, and what really inspired it?
Yeah, I think so. I remember when I was growing up, yeah, a lot of middle grade is like super uplifting and like upbeat, and like there's a lot of really good, funny middle grade out there. I mean, I like loved reading.
Not to say that this is not uplifting, because it is.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Like Clues, I mean, I don't know about Clues being funny, but like Clues is definitely not like, oh, like read it for like sunshine and rainbows. Yeah, in fact, a lot of people were tagging me in like reviews, and they're like, I'm crying, and I was like, I'm sorry. Like, I don't really know. But yeah, apparently clues kind of elicits those kinds of emotions instead. But I think that kids do need books that deal with like harder topics. I mean, as a kid, you deal with all sorts of things. Like you do deal with the grief of losing a loved one. You deal with like the grief of kind of like there's so many like mini griefs in the book. Like I mean, yes, like both the main characters are grappling with like losing their father figures or having lost their father figures, but also there's like the loss of a friendship. What happens when, like friendships break apart, and what happens when you like lose someone really close to you, or someone who's lost someone really close to them. I mean, those are like bullying as well. Like those are all kind of topics that I think kids are familiar with, even if it's not like the most uplifting thing in the world. I think that there should be a space out there in middle grade that does deal with those topics. So, kids can read like a really, really funny book. And then like, if they're like feeling really down and they like want some kind of like sympathetic story, like they can read Clues, right? But yeah, I mean, I hope that my book adds to kind of the whole genre of middle grade by providing a way to kind of like express grief in a way that kids can understand.
No, I honestly really love that, because as much as we love and like I absolutely adore like the fun adventure books, it's a fact of life that some people are going to be dealing with like losing friendships, with bullying, all of these very serious topics. So being able to see it represented and seeing characters come through on the other side so much stronger really is an inspiring read that I hope someone can eventually like see themselves in, for sure. A lot of books that I've read really focus on like friendships coming together, but as a fact of life, as you get older, you might part ways with people. And I really love how you represented that into the book, like especially for characters who are fairly young. What inspired you to write that?
Yeah, I mean, I just remember some of my biggest like heartbreak. So I don't know, I didn't have that many like romantic heartbreaks when I was younger. Like I literally did not have a crush on someone until I was like 16. But so that means that like my biggest heartbreaks as a kid were like, losing friendships. Like it's like the sad.
Arguably so much hard, like arguably so much sadder.
Yeah, it's so sad because like it's not even like they just don't want to be your friend. Like it's like you feel like it's totally on you that like they just wanted to stop being your friend, because like with friendships, it's like you can always make friends. Like you can always like infinitely add on like, several friendships. But like if someone is like, I actively do not want to hang out with you, that's just so sad. And so I think that I really wanted to explore the dynamics of friendships in this book, because like that was so real and visceral to me as a kid, just the feeling of like losing a friend, or like, getting like really distant from a friend. That is in itself like a really, really big heartbreak. So, I mean, I'm always a big proponent of books exploring friendships, because I think that honestly, people don't talk about losing friendships as much as they talk about losing like romantic partners or romantic relationships. And I think that kind of deserves its own kind of narrative or storyline of its own.
Especially because when you lose friendships, it can happen in so many different ways. It can be someone chooses to just like not be friends with you anymore because like they don't like you for some reason.
Yeah.
But it could also be people moving away. I've had friends where like you go to summer camp with someone and you think like you're really great friends for those weeks, but then afterwards, like you don't really keep in touch anymore. And honestly, it's very heartbreaking.
It's so heartbreaking. And like yeah, like you said it perfectly, like friendships can kind of like die in so many different ways, right? Like someone could just stop talking to you, someone could like just like pretend to hang out with you and then like not really like you and like be talking like bad like trash behind your back. Like there's so many ways, and I think I just wanted to kind of explore that, but I also wanted to explore what it does mean to like find your best friend. And so that's kind of what Ro and Benji's story is all about. Yeah.
I also really love how like Ro and Benji obviously is like a boy and a girl in this book, but they're like platonic, really great friends in that aspect too. Was that something that was intentional on your part? Like, I think it would have been not necessarily like an immensely different story, but it could have been a different story if Ro and Benji were like two girls, or like, I don't know, the same gender.
Yeah. So the very, 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 very first iteration of the draft, like my pre-outlining stage, I had Ro and Benji as like girls. They had like different names, but I think that one of the notes that I got back on that from my agent was like, oh, like, love this, but like the characters sound a little bit too similar. And I think that I like thought about it a little bit more, and I was like Ro and Benji is like a boy and a girl, like make a lot of sense, right? Because I really like when there's like platonic like boy and girl friendships. Like I think they can work super well and like have a really, really great dynamic. And I think, you know, Benji like brings like a really, really different viewpoint to the table as like instead of Ro. And so I think it just ended up naturally being that way. I think I totally could have written a version of the story in which they were two, like both girls or both boys or something. But I think that, yeah, I think Benji naturally evolved into like a boy who like had the voice that he had. So it was more like organic, I guess.
You also talk a little bit about how Rove in particular is half Chinese, half white. For both of us, we're both children of diaspora, and this is Subtle Asian Book Club. Do you want to talk a little bit about that Asian identity and how it was incorporated into the story?
Yeah, definitely. So Ro is Chinese American. So I really wrote from that perspective. I'm not biracial. So I really tried to approach that with a lot of sensitivity because I know that there are unique issues to kind of being, you know, a biracial kid of the diaspora. So yeah, for that part, like I have like sensitivity readers, everything. But in terms of, you know, Chinese American and kind of being a part of the diaspora, I really wanted Ro to have a supportive Chinese household. Like one of my favorite characters to write in the book was Ro's mom, right? Because she's just like really loving and supportive parent. Like obviously she has a lot of her own private issues about like grief and like dealing with the loss of the dad, but yeah, she like has a lot of love for Ro. And I think there was a line in there I wrote where it's like they like melted into each other like butter. Like they like really, you know, since they both were like all each other had after the loss of Ro's dad, like they really, really got close, and they have been ever since. And so I think that a way that I expressed kind of like the diaspora story was like writing about like diaspora, like kind of family love and family connections. And so having Ro be a part of the family's like Chinese New Year celebrations, having Ro's mom speak Chinese to Ro, having Ro like sort of, you know, like dealing with all these issues within her family, and also dealing with kind of what it means to be one of the only Asian kids at her school. Like those are all really relevant issues to kind of the Chinese American or Asian American, I guess, narrative. And so, yeah, I had Ro kind of go through all those because I understand that that's probably what she would have gone through at that time.
Did you realize anything about yourself or maybe about like your community as you were writing this book, especially because Rose was set in a place where she was one of the very few Asians in a predominantly white community?
Yeah, I mean, this book drew more on my experiences than I thought it would. So the book itself is set in Sacramento, California. But it reflects a lot of my experiences that I felt growing up as a like Chinese American kid in the Midwest. I mean, I went to like for elementary school, like I went to a relatively homogenous school. Like there were a lot of like cultural differences, I think, that I sort of dealt with as a kid, and then I didn't really like unpack all of that until I got to writing about Ro and like kind of like reliving my experiences as a kid in middle school. And so yeah, I mean, I definitely realized a lot. And also this weirdly like gave me more appreciation for my parents, because one of the things that I really wanted to write about was like the kids' relationships with their mothers, and how like even after the loss of their like father figures, like the mothers are literally keeping the family together. Like they're the ones that kind of deserve like so much respect and admiration. And writing about Ro's mom made me kind of like look up to my mom a little bit more, because I know like growing up, obviously we've had our like little disagreements or whatever, but I came to like really, really appreciate her throughout the writing of kind of Ro and the like mothers, like even Benji's mother as well. So
no, I love Ro's mom in this book. I was actually rewatching Gilmore Girls, and I love that like mother-daughter dynamic. And part of me, whenever I read Asian stories, I always really crave to see that close relationship between a mother and a daughter too. Not necessarily from like a tiger parent perspective, but more so from like a caring perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So seeing that represented in Clues was really touching for me personally.
Yeah, and I mean, oh, sorry,
No, you can go.
I think that it's really important because I mean, a lot of us did grow up kind of with that like tiger parent like experience, like like there's a reason why it's so universal. But I did want to write a mother that was like just wholeheartedly like supportive and caring and everything. And obviously Ro's story is like a very, very unique circumstance, but like she, like the mom is just she just like 100% unconditionally supports Ro. And I wanted that kind of representation in the story.
No, I love that, because I feel like sometimes people don't think that, like based off of stereotypes, But within like the Asian community, family is such an important like component of our culture. So seeing that was like wonderful. Ro in this case is half Chinese, half white. You said you're full Chinese.
Yeah.
Was there a specific reason why you felt like you wanted to like make her biracial?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really interesting question. I think she just came into my head kind of as biracial. And I know that's kind of a cop-out answer, but I was like, well, how did you imagine her? I imagined her as biracial. But also, I think that there would have been a different story that would have been told had, for example, had Ro come from like a Chinese immigrant family or something. Because I think her dad like grew up obsessed with space and like had this, you know, really like rosy view of kind of like the American. I think he grew up in the 60s or 70s, right? And so like really kind of like was growing up with all these like things, like was obsessed with kind of like the moon landing and Star Wars and everything. And so I think had Ro's family been, for example, an immigrant family that like just moved from China or something, like they might not have latched on to those like American, or might not have latched on to kind of those events the way that Ro's like white dad did. But that's kind of, yeah, I mean, it's a super nuanced story. And I think I made the decision for Ro to be biracial. And then I was like, okay, like you have to represent her story accurately. Like you can't just write about Ro as if she were like, for example, like fully like, you know, Chinese heritage, like, you know, not biracial character. And so once I did make that decision, I was like, okay, like you have to like write her like in a way that's like sensitive and like it portrays her accurately the way that she would have wanted to be portrayed.
No, that's sounds amazing. One thing that like makes Clue stand out is it's not set in like modern day. It's not set in like 2020 something. It's set in like the 1980s.
80. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Was there a specific reason why you wanted to set it like back then versus now, and how it's kind of shifted the tone of the story?
Yeah, so there's a couple reasons why I said it in the 80s. I think that part of the reason was like just like logistically. I mean, if it was set in like 2019 or something, like it would have been a really short book because Benji would have just like looked up his dad on Google, like in like Yellow Pages and like
Ancestry.com.
Ancestry.com, exactly. And like would have like, I don't know, like Twitter stalked his dad or something. I don't know. But yeah, so I think that setting it in the 80s makes it just like plot wise, like there's a lot of mystery surrounding like if, you know, in the 80s, like if you lose someone's phone number or address, like you lose contact to them. Like you do not know where they are. Like you don't know.
You lose a little address book.
You lose the little address book. Exactly. I mean, I grew up with the address book and like the like whole like contacts and like if you didn't have their phone number, like how would you find it? Maybe email them. I don't know. But yeah, also email wasn't like available back then. But another reason why I wanted to set in the 80s and specifically the early 80s was because I really wanted to capture sort of the optimism of the US space mission. I think the 80s were a really unique time, and obviously there was the like Challenger tragedy in 1986. And so I said in 1983 because I sort of wanted to capture like what the like optimism was like during that time. And then in terms of kind of like what happened after, Erin Entrada Kelly wrote like a fantastic book about kind of the Challenger disaster called We Dream of Space. So if you want like a chronological book to follow clues, then yeah, We Dream of Space is fantastic.
We have, and not a sequel, but like something you can pick up right after you finish.
Exactly. Yeah.
I was going to talk about, I don't know if you've ever watched the Disney movie Dad Napped.
I haven't.
Starring Emily Osment, but that's what like the vibes gave me.
I think someone has brought that up to me before. They're like, have you watched this Emily Osment movie? And I've like watched like 2 Emily Osment movies. So yeah, no, I definitely should like check that out or something. Cause I've heard it referenced multiple times in reference to clues.
It definitely helped me like set the scene and like be able to picture things in my head as I was reading. So it was really fun. Also, like I listened to the audiobook for this and highly recommend. I thought it was so fun to like listen to the audiobook while reading the physical pages.
Yeah, the audiobook narrators are so talented. Like I remember I was like listening to them for like sample tracks of clues, and I was just like, oh my gosh, like this is my book being read by people, and it was such a cool experience. So yeah, I totally agree. It blew me away.
Moving then a little bit away from like book specific questions, we wanted to talk a little bit about your writing journey, your publishing journey. Do you want to tell us a little bit about how you got your start in the publishing industry? You've mentioned before that you started writing books like at a very young age. So how did you get your start? And I'll ask the second part to that question after that.
Yeah, so I started writing when I was like 11 or something. Like I like wrote my first book because I don't know, it was like a weird like, oh, like I guess I can do it kind of decision. I did like Camp NaNoWriMo, so that like NaNoWriMo, like, oh, you yeah, you can write a book in a month kind of feeling. Like I latched onto that at a super young age. And so I was just
You
like
say
writing.
that very nonchalantly, but like you wrote a book, like books at 11. So
I
it's
had
like
so much
something to
time
be
as a kid.
very proud of.
Clearly I didn't have enough friends or something. But yeah, so I started writing when I was 11, and then yeah, like I had like a really supportive community. Like my best friend was like 100. I mean, I dedicated this book to my friend Katya, but yeah, she was super supportive of my writing. I had like a middle school librarian. Yeah, exactly. It's to Katya. I had a middle school librarian who was like, yeah, like you could absolutely become. So I had like a really, really, like supportive, like people encouraged me from a young age. And I think that that's like really important to like mention, because some people grow up and like their like writing is like disparaged, or like they're not, they're like not encouraged by their teachers. So that does make a difference. But yeah, so I was like just like writing my books, and then I wrote like I think 3 books. I started querying when I was a freshman in high school. It was like a YA fantasy based on the Chinese Opium Wars, and I was like super hopeful. I know, I was like, I really love that book. It taught me a lot, even though it like didn't end up selling. And then I got an agent with that book by pitching to her at a Writer's Digest conference, Jess Riegel, who's like literally the best agent ever. And then we tried selling that book, didn't sell. And then it was like very much back to the drawing board. And a lot of things in my life were being shaken up at that point. Like I was making decisions about like where I wanted to go for college, and like end of high school. And like my family was about to move across the country to like San Diego from like Illinois. And then during all that chaos, I wasn't quite sure like what I would write again, if I would write again. And then the idea for Clues to the Universe came to me, I think the summer after my high school graduation. So that is a TLDR of how I got into publishing. It's like a very like long jumbled story, but a lot of like false starts, a lot of sort of books written and lessons learned. So yeah.
This was something we talked a little bit about on the Gen Z panel, but like you're also a college student right now. You're in your senior year at Stanford, you're studying econ, and you're also an author. Do you feel like this is a weird question. Like, do you feel like you would want to be an author full time? Like, how do you balance both of these aspects of your life?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. Kind of very, very appropriate for this time when I'm like trying to figure out what I want to do next. But for now, I think I've always done like something in writing, and so I mean it's a really good way for me to kind of like step away from writing, refill my creative well. Like things can just be going on in the back of my mind, and then like I step back into writing and like start writing again. But I don't know how that like would work with like deadlines, whatever. But yeah, so I think for now the like next step in my life is to go to grad school and also write on the side.
Congrats again!
Oh yeah, thank
you got into your top choice.
Yeah. So I'm currently like I'm going into like a grad program for public policy at Stanford, and that's like a 1-year thing. And then from that point on, who knows what I'm gonna do, but I think it's always like I'm taking it one step at a time. Like I'm always like trying to find time to write on the side. I think I prioritize that a lot, and I've been learning to prioritize that a little bit more and like really, really protect my writing time.
A common question that people like to ask is like, do you have any advice for people who are hoping to get published one day?
Yeah, I would say I know this advice sounds a little bit weird coming from me, but I would say like patience is like it's really helpful, I think. I have this like weird arbitrary notion. I was like, oh, I have to be published as a teenager. Like I have to like, if I'm not published by the time I'm 16, like I have failed at this writing thing. And what I've been realizing, I don't know what it was like, but I've been realizing, I think more and more that like I literally have the rest of my life to write, hopefully, and hopefully my writing just gets better with each book. So like, I mean, in theory, I mean, publishing is a really, really hard industry to break into. And I'm not saying like, oh, you can get published whenever you want, but I think that there is value in kind of like being patient and like allowing your craft and your skills to develop, as opposed to like rushing kind of a deadline or like something that you've like set for yourself. So yeah, that's the advice that I would give to people trying to get published. And then another piece of advice, if I can, I don't know, you just mentioned one tip, but is to kind of like form a community. Like I found I think I joined Twitter like when I was like 13 or something. And like since then, I mean, I've been off Twitter, I've been on Twitter, I've been on social media. Like it's just, but like throughout, like I've developed friendships that have like really, really persevered through the years. So yeah, having like a support system is like really, really, really valuable when you're trying to go through really hard things in publishing, like querying or like being on sub or like, yeah, like writing a book, I guess is also really hard as well.
It's not just IRL friendships that are amazing, but online friendships are just as amazing.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I remember like, you know, I like, for example, like I became friends with Cameron Garrett back when we were like 13, 14, whatever.
Oh
And we were like, yeah, I was like, I put out a tweet one day that was like, does anyone want to be critique partners? And then she responded, she's like, I do. And like, and then like, we like exchanged manuscripts and like, we just, I don't know, stayed friends, like mutuals, whatever, throughout the years. And like, yeah, now we're like good, like writing friends, and she's amazing. And like, she's like written a book. Her book is coming out in May, I think. And like, I've gotten published as well. And so those friendships, like you like really set down the seeds at some time. And they like, I mean, you just watch them really excel at writing and at books and publishing and stuff. So yeah, you can like, bonus is like, you can also be really proud of your friends as well when they achieve amazing things.
I also love that you highlight that it's more of a building each other up type of thing rather than like feeling it's competition too. Like being a woman of color or being like a BIPOC within the publishing industry, sometimes people might view it as, I don't know if people do view it as competition, but it can be a very tough space to be in. So do you want to talk a little bit about your experience as an Asian American within the publishing industry, if that's like any different? I don't know if it's like different, but like, do you want to talk about your experience as an Asian American in the publishing industry?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to clarify, is the competition among like BIPOC authors or like a competition among like all authors? I was just, or all Gen Z, like.
There's this perspective sometimes that publishing tends to tokenize like their POC stories. And as a result of that, there's this also incorrect perspective. I don't know if it's necessarily incorrect, that there can only be one of each story of like one identity or one type of like experience, which obviously should not be the case since everyone's experience is different. And then there's also that perspective of there's this huge rise of books by marginalized authors nowadays that people think that those are trendy or at the forefront. When really, like, if you look at the statistics, there was that New York Times article about how since the 1980s, I think, only 5% of books were by writers of color. So even though we have a more visible presence now, that's not necessarily like relevant, like matching like what's actually being put out there. So if you have any thoughts on this and maybe like sharing your own experience. That was very long-winded. I'm so sorry.
This is such that was such a good clarification. And yeah, I do have a lot of thoughts on it. I think that it is a big fault of publishing to tokenize marginalized authors or BIPOC authors or authors of marginalized identities. I think that it is entirely, you know, publishing's fault that we feel obligated to like compete among our community. Whereas like, for example, like white authors get deal after deal after deal and they feel like they have no, or not saying no competition, but just like there isn't that like increased pressure of like not only, you know, publishing a book, but publishing a book that, for example, like has like a palatable Asian American voice, right? Like if it doesn't fit the like Asian American like narrative that publishers think they want to publish, like then it doesn't sell. Whereas it could have been like a really, really good book otherwise that like introduced a new perspective from an Asian American author. And so, yeah, I think publishing really does cultivate kind of this like false sense of like competition and like kind of this like zero sum game that can become really toxic sometimes. I think that among the authors, like I'm not speaking for all authors, but what I've interacted with, like on the other side, like authors are really supportive of each other. Like our view is like, oh, when one of us succeeds, like we succeed, you know? And whereas like, I think a lot of the onus is on publishing for being like, oh, we can only have one, like, for example, like big Asian American voice. And so, yeah, I think that, I mean, I also think that there can be so many, like there doesn't have to be just one Asian American owned voice's voice. Like there can be so many owned voices stories. And even if that one particular owned voices book doesn't reflect your own experience, like within that community, like it's a valid like narrative because it's just kind of someone else's experience as opposed to your own. So I think that that's also kind of like a really something that I've also been thinking about a lot. But yeah, I definitely think that, you know, there is this sense, I think this like weird fear that because BIPOC authors are starting to have a seat at the table, people are scared that like we're taking all the seats at the table, which obviously we're not, according to that New York Times article. So yeah, much to think about, but those are kind of some of my thoughts about it.
Did you ever feel like you had to justify your writing or maybe justify your experiences as an Asian American woman in comparison to like if you weren't? Like maybe some things that were happening, like maybe like a scene in your book or maybe an experience of your character, or I don't know, that might be very niche.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I haven't had to justify anything in Clues in particular. I think that I have had to kind of justify, I don't know, one experience that kind of like rubs me a weird way is I went to this like author event for this like New York Times bestselling author when I was like writing the like Chinese Opium Wars YA, and I like mentioned to her that like I was like querying it, you know, and her response was like, oh yeah, like diversity is like really trendy, like publishers will love that, like, and I was like, I don't know, I didn't know how to feel in that moment because I was like yay me, like they want me because like that's popular now. Like I didn't really, it felt really really weird, right? Because also I felt like really dismissed that like, oh, like, you know, you'll sell because it's like becoming a trend now, whereas I've always been Asian
versus
American.
Like your own ability.
Yeah, exactly. Versus like my ability to get a book deal. So I don't know. I guess that's been one experience in which I was like really, like, I mean, I don't know how to feel about this. But yeah.
I'm sorry to hear about that experience because it's just very frustrating, and like your stories and like Asian stories itself are just so valid, and every, like we said before, like every story is different and everyone represents it in a different way. On the flip side of that, you're also a fairly young author. We categorize you and like lump you with like the Gen Z authors of like Chloe, Gong, Tashi, Zoe, Rocky, and it's definitely probably like very different being a younger author within this publishing industry that spans many different age ranges. Do you feel like your experience as a younger author has been different from your peers? And then as a follow-up to that, do you feel like a rift between Gen Z authors and then older authors, or like older, more established authors, whether in terms of like your writing style, approach to the craft? This is a very long question. I'm so sorry. I'll clarify anything you need. But do you feel like there are a lot of commonalities across generation, regardless of like generational differences?
Yeah, so I'll answer this question in a bunch of parts. I'll like remind me of like.
I'm sorry, we can like break this down.
No, yeah, this is so interesting. Well, first of all, yes, I have found like really cool cross generation, because I think that middle grade is overall like a super sweet community. Like there's been nothing but good. All they want are like books that make kids feel good. Like that's like their only purpose, right? Like we have like middle grade authors who like have a chat every single Monday, like NG book chat or something, and they're like, oh yes, like I love this book, like I love that. Like it's so supportive. And a lot of like middle grade authors, I think like are like a little bit older than me. I know Jake Arlo, the author of Almost Flying, is like my age basically, but like a lot of the other debut authors are like a little bit older than me, or like kind of like in different stages of life, and like we just support each other like unconditionally. I formed like really amazing friendships, or like just like a good like support. Like, you know, I always boost their tweets, they always boost my tweets, they always say lovely things about my book. Like we you know, leave like reviews on each other's books. And so I think that that's really really possible in middle grade, just because that's kind of like a really like that community is like, oh, we're just like here to talk about books. I think that when I was like writing, or I still am, because I'm currently working on a YA book right now, but I think that sometimes overall in the scheme of publishing, there can be this sense of like sort of a scrutiny towards younger writers, because it's like, oh, like you're a young writer, like did you kind of like hack into it, like, you know, like did you like was there a shortcut that you took? Whereas I view it as like literally, like I think there's this mastery quote, right, that's like you're not a master at something until you put like 10,000 hours into it. Like some people just start like I put my presumably 10,000 hours of writing in. Like I was writing pretty much, you know, every
Since
single.
you were 11.
I was 11. So yeah, it's that like Stephen King, like 10 years to like mastery kind of thing. Like I published at 21. So, I mean, I paid my dues. Like I worked, I looked up every single kind of like publishing resource there was. I scrawled the internet. Like I kind of, you know, gave myself this education that I probably could have gotten through like an MFA or something, like, but like it was my education. And so I think that sometimes I have to kind of like extra prove that I deserve a seat at the table, just because I think there might be like the assumption that like, oh, you started writing a book last year, like, and then you got to publish. Like it's not really that easy. But I also think that in terms of like writing Gen Z, I think that it's just kind of like, I mean, with every generation, right, there are certain things that kind of like influence our upbringing on like the way that we grow up and the way that we look at things. Like I don't know, just so many factors. Like I grew up with like, I don't know, like Snapchat and like Vine and like whatever, like Vine. Literally I can quote this will become obsolete in 10 years, but like I can literally quote like half the Vines there are, like, and that's just like my obscure, like generational weird ability. But in terms of Gen Z, like, I mean, there's like a lot of Gen Z, like that we just like likes using certain memes because that's like what we grew up with. Like we like, you know, certain references. Like a lot of us are on TikTok because like TikTok is just like, I literally spend 4 hours a day on TikTok. So like obviously that was going to like bleed into my life, you know, like then I don't know if we can swear on this show, but like then I start like shit posting on TikTok, and like then like it just like snowballs. It's kind of like a product of like what you are like raised by and like what you grew up surrounded by. And so I mean, yeah, like that's kind of, it's not like Gen Z like meaning to be like, oh, like this is what separates us from like other generations. I think every single generation is just like influenced by a different set of like in like of like cultural references. Like I know there's some like cultural references that like older authors make that go over my head, but like I totally understand that because that's what kind of they grew up with and they were surrounded by. So yeah, I do think, very, very long TLDR, but I do think that cross-generational friendships are super possible. And I've really seen that in like the middle grade space and like also the YA space to some extent. Like I think my debut group, like we're from all ages and we all like support and, you know, really like promote each other's works. But yeah, I think as a Gen Z author, there are just certain things that mannerisms, whatever, that I include in my books just because I was born at whenever I was born.
I'm sure it also allows you to be like closer to your readers in that sense too, because they're of like a younger demographic too.
Yeah, exactly. Like, for example, I mean, even with middle grade, like middle school was like 8 years ago for me. So like, I remember things that happened because I mean, I probably have a bad long-term memory, but like that, there's a lot of experiences that like I was familiar with like growing up and in middle school. And then I'm like working on a college YA right now, and I'm like literally in college. Oh, so like clearly I will put a lot of college. Fresh. Yeah, very too fresh to me. So there's a lot of like references that I would obviously put in from that.
You mentioned that you're writing a YA book set in college. Do you want to talk a little bit about like what you're working on right now, what your readers can anticipate coming out in the near future or like in the future?
Yeah, so I'm working on 2 books right now. I'm working on a second middle grade book. I pitch it as the Duality Club meets the farewell. And it's about a girl who kind of like, after her 6th grade year, she feels really estranged from her like family and friends. And it's about her getting closer to her grandmother during the summer after her 6th grade year, and then her realizing that her grandmother has dementia. And it is a book that is super, super personal to me because my grandmother had dementia as well. And I remember I was watching The Farewell with a friend whenever it came out, like 2 years ago or something. And I watched it, and like the story of like the main character and her grandma, like it just, we like my friend and I were like the only people in the theater like crying for like half an hour after the movie ended. And it's just super super personal to me. Like I love kid/grandparent stories. I think I just watched the movie Minari. Also lost it at that movie. It was just, yeah, it's just like I loved my grandmother so much, and you know, it was like really hard to see her go through dementia. Anyway, sorry, I like went on a whole like tangent there.
No, I'm so excited for that one because I'm like very close to my grandmother too, and then my grandpa also had Alzheimer's, so
right, yeah,
I'm gonna cry buckets, but I'm ready for it.
Right now. But I know. But yeah, and also it's like really, I've just been reading, I mean, articles about like Asian American, like elderly people who've been like harassed and like attacked because of this virus. And like, it just makes me so like heartbroken and really angry. And like, I want to write a book about like a kid's relationship with their grandparent. I don't even know what that would do about this whole mess, but like I think that like makes me want to like write a kid grandparent story even more, because I just like it makes me like want to like write those kinds of narratives. Anyway,
I'm
sorry.
looking forward to it. I'm so excited.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry for putting us both in sending us both to our fields. But the other book I'm working on is a college YA. And I pitch it as, I like always pitch my books as combinations of things, but I pitch it as the half of it meets Ladybird, if like Ladybird was like queer and Asian, which I feel like it could very conceivably be, because like a queer Asian Ladybird will also have, like be having a very contentious relationship with her mother. And so yeah, it's basically about a girl and like just like figuring out her feelings of like love and like grief about her mother who passed, and like about her sexuality during her freshman year at college. And then when she starts dating kind of like the picture perfect guy, only to fall for kind of the girl on her ski team. So that is kind of what's up in the kind of Christina universe. But yeah, so those are kind of what I'm working on right now.
Those both sound so amazing. I'm also like, because I'm also fresh out of college, I'm like so excited for a college YA. I feel like
the representation, oh my God, I could go all day about like, I just think that like, I personally, I think high school YA is like super valid for like, just to kind of start with, but I think that college, like it should naturally extend into college, because so many people I think have, myself included, had their like coming of age experience in college. Like in high school, I was literally like running around. I didn't do shit. Like I was just sad and doing extracurriculars all the time, right? So like I was
like I did not discover like who I was, like what I wanted to do with my life, like have my whole existential moment until college. Because high school, and I feel like we need more books of that, because in high school it's just like, okay, drama. Like granted, like we are very dramatic in high school, but then you enter college and you're like, wait, I did not read any books to tell me how to navigate my life and that I should be mimicking the way I read high school books.
Right, exactly. And there's like the whole extra existential thing in college of like, what should I do with the rest of my life? Like on top of, trying to figure out like so many like other things. It's just like a really unique environment. And I think that especially also for like kids from like immigrant families, like my personal experience has been like a lot of my like experience in high school has kind of been like living up to like my immigrant parents' expectations. And so what happens when you go to college and you're still dealing with those expectations, but you're also learning to what it means to kind of like become your own person. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm grappling with in this YA.
I'm so ready. Okay. Sorry, we're like getting closer to time, but do you want to tell us a little bit about what you hope for readers to get away from your stories? And in this case, I guess because Clues is the one that is out, like what you hope for readers to get out of your books?
Yeah, absolutely. I hope it just makes just like gives readers a hug. I don't know. I just want Clues to be a book that like makes readers like feel and like think about what it means to like, find a best friend, and like about all sorts of loves, like platonic loves, family loves, like found family, everything. And so yeah, I mean, I guess side effect, it has been making people cry a lot. So I'm like, I'm sorry. But also like, I do hope that it like does touch readers in like a poignant way. And I just hope it's worth their time. I don't know. I think that's the hope for every book out there. It's just like,
definitely worth the time.
Worth the like 3 hours or however long you like put into it. Yeah.
No, it was definitely worth the time. And also your answer was just so cute and wholesome. Let me just say, when I asked Chloe this question, she was just like, fight imperialism or like fight colonialism.
Oh my God,
like,
yeah.
That's your answer for like what you hope for like people to get out of the story, which is like totally valid answer, like very relevant for These Violent Delights, but very like wholesome, like wonderful space babies book.
She got that for me. I mean, I was screaming in her text when I was like reading the end of These Violent Delights. I was like, oh my God, Chloe, I can't believe you did this to me. Like, I'm so up, like, I'm going to fight. Like, it's also I will go off on a tangent about These Violent Delights if you don't stop me. But yeah, it's such a good book. And I think that Chloe also, like, that's a book that will stay with readers and like impact the readers for a long time.
So let's wrap things up with a quick little speed round. I don't know how speedy it'll be, but do you want to start off by telling us what your most anticipated 2021 release is?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is kind of like looking forward, I guess. I'll list things in every category if that's okay, because there's no way I can.
No, go for it. Like, so, I could not give one answer. Like, I don't expect you to either.
In terms of middle grade, really, really looking forward to Chad Lucas's Thanks a Lot universe, and also Jake Maya Arlo's Almost Flying. In terms of YA, really, really, really looking forward to Counting Down with You. I was lucky enough to read an early version and like loved that book to death. Also really looking forward to Gear Breakers by Zoe Hanamakuta. In terms of adult, I have Honey Girl sitting on my shelf right now. Like I'm so excited to read it. And so I'm really looking forward to reading Honey Girl, and then also really excited for She Who Became the Sun by Shelley P. Chan. So
Yes. Next question. What is a book that you would recommend to everyone?
What was a book that I would recommend to everyone? There's two books that I would recommend to everyone. I recommend Take Back the Block by Crystal Giles. Those are both middle grade books. And then also A Place to Hang the Moon by Kate Albus. Those are some of my favorite books this year.
I actually haven't read either of those, so.
Oh yeah, I definitely highly recommend both of them. One of them, so A Place to Hang the Moon is like set in post-war Britain, and it has a very like a little princess, like those like classic middle grade books vibes that you just like want to curl up with by the fireplace. And then Take Back the Block is like just such a good and powerful like story. I think it's about dealing with like a kid dealing with gentrification in his neighborhood in North Carolina. So yeah, super funny main character, and also like really, really great kind of story and really important story topic.
Sounds amazing. Okay, question number 3. What is your favorite Asian food or foods?
Oh, yes. So my mom makes really, really good nyeomian. It's like beef noodles. She's gotten really good at it. I was like in quarantine.
That's not easy to make.
It's not easy. Like she stews the like beef. I'm just a side note, I'm really scared that I'll like grow up and like have no skills that my mother, because she just like keeps cooking for me. So I will grow up and be like useless and unable to cook things. I
think I made like red curry, which is like Thai, so like not Taiwanese at all, but then it was not the best. And I'm just like, oh my God, how am I going to keep the traditions alive?
Yeah, my mom was like, oh my God, what are you going to do when you go off like after college? So I will sit down with her this summer and like have a whole crash course of like, how do you make this? Like, how do you make that? But also one of my favorite foods is like the jelly that they have at the like Asian supermarkets that come in those like big plastic containers. I had like 10 of those a day when I was a kid. They're so good.
Do you have a favorite flavor?
Oh yes, mango or lychee. Mango or lychee are my favorites.
Definitely amazing. Moving away from food because we're getting really hungry, but what has been your go-to quarantine hobby?
My go-to quarantine hobby. So I picked up this habit of like making earrings because I was like, oh, I want to like make earrings. And so I started like making like my personal earring, or these are not made, these are bought, but like personal earrings. I started making like bookish earrings. I made Raquel Marie like Ophelia After All earrings, like roses and like gold, and like yeah, it's just been like really lovely, like kind of like making earrings for people and also for myself, because I mean it cost me a lot of money on Etsy. Like it's economically not worth it, but like also it's just like something pretty to like enjoy, and like I like crafting.
It sparks joy, and
it does spark joy.
If it does, then like it has a purpose.
Exactly.
Okay, final question. What has been your favorite college course?
Oh my gosh. Okay. I have two. So my favorite college courses, I took an Asian American art history class last year, and it was life-changing. Like I've never taken an art history class, much less Asian American. And like my professor was so knowledgeable. I like learned about so many cool Asian American artists that like would be forgotten by like the artist canon or whatever is out there. Like, and it was so cool and rewarding. And like, I learned about like so many like people to like look up to and like just like keep in the back of my head. And then I'm currently in a Asian American contemporary stories class, and it's the best thing ever. Like it's like a really small, discussion seminar, and like we just read books and like just come to class and discuss. I'm doing like one of my final projects about the half of it. Like it's just great all around. Like I'm so glad I get to like have courses such as those. So yeah, super rewarding for me. But those have been some of my
amazing. Honestly, one of my biggest regrets in college was not taking more like Asian studies courses, because I was really like on the grind. Got to get my like finance courses in, got to get my business courses in, and honestly,
that was me during freshman and sophomore year, and it made a world of difference when I like moved from like lecture halls of like white men to like a small discussion seminar where like everyone was Asian and like everyone had like really like 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 raw like experiences that I could relate to. But yes, it's definitely such a different vibe. And I regret not having gone into it sooner. Like I wish I had minored in like Asian American studies or something.
So thank you so much for being with us. We're so excited to have you. This was so much fun to listen to you talk, and I hope everyone else enjoys Clues, enjoys listening to you and like your future works. Do you have any last words you want to share with your audience?
I have no last words, but I mean, I always like love reading and boosting like BIPOC voices from like marginalized authors. And so, yeah, I'm really glad that like publishing is like slowly warming up to those voices. And I'm glad that I get to be a part of it. But I also hope that like kind of like what we discussed earlier, like my, I guess, entry into publishing like opens doors for people instead of like closing it for other marginalized creators. So, yeah.
And where can your readers find you online if they want to contact you or like keep up with your updates?
Yeah, so for like author updates, probably my Twitter at Li Writes or my Instagram at Christina Li Writes. And then for just like good old fun, follow me on TikTok at Li Writes. I don't really post like necessarily like educational material, but yeah, I'm also on TikTok a lot, so I'd be remiss to not mention that.
Do you also have an author website?
I do have an author website. Terrible of me to not have brought it up first and instead brought out my TikTok, but my author website is at it's www.christinalewrites.com. So everything I do is either Li Writes or Christina Li Writes.
Perfect. All of those will be linked in the description box below, so make sure to check out Christina, give her a follow, keep up with her videos. Like, it'll be a really fun time. Thank you so much again for watching, and thank you again, Christina, for being here, and we hope to see you next time for whatever we have planned. Bye.